introduce our panel for today, and I will start by introducing fellow Rotarian Katie Kirkpatrick, who's going to introduce the rest of our panel speakers. Katie, as you know, is a great friend to Rotary. She's also widely recognized as one of the most influential leaders impacting the growth of this entire region. She serves as president and CEO of the Metro Atlanta Chamber, overseeing a 160-year-old organization that's driving economic development for the nation's 9th largest market. Katie's 14 years with the Chamber also include some critical work in an earlier chapter focused on our higher educational ecosystem and on workforce development. That has in turn placed her in the perfect position to moderate today's panel as we think about women's education and the important ways we are preparing women to be part of this thriving and complicated economy. Please join me in welcoming Katie Kirkpatrick.
Good afternoon. I'd like to go ahead and invite our two distinguished panelists to come up and join me while I just do brief introductions, because I think all of us in the room would say we likely already know these fine women because they are Rotarians. But just a quick introduction, and then I'll grab the mic and take a seat. But I do want to remind everybody, when you looked at today's agenda and looked at what the topic would be, it's about women in education. And so just a reminder about some of the statistics that we read. Women make up more than 56% of students on college campuses. So remember that. This is also important for my 18-year-old son. In every ethnic and racial group in the country, by age 31, women are more likely than men to have received a college degree. And finally, today, women also earn 60% of all master's degrees and more than half of all doctoral and professional degrees. So I would tell you that women are important in the business world and in leadership, and we're going to have a conversation about that today. So briefly, a quick introduction for our esteemed guests. Zack, who is president of Agnes Scott College. Lee became the 9th president of Agnes Scott in July of 2018. She is a Phi Beta Kappa graduate of Mount Holyoke College, which I believe Beverly may have had a tenure at Mount Holyoke as well. You have shared? They're all sisters, which recognized Lee as a woman of influence in 2012. She also holds a JD degree from Northeastern University School of Law. And I could go on and on about the distinguishing resume of Lee, but we're not going to do that. And then, of course, we have Beverly Daniel Tatum, who is President Emeritus of Spelman College. Dr. Tatum, president, of course, of Emeritus of Spelman College, is a clinical psychologist, widely known for both her expertise on race relations and as a thought leader in higher education. Her 13 years at Spelman were marked by innovation and growth, and her visionary leadership was recognized in 2013 with the Carnegie Academic Leadership Award. So if you would, welcome Lee and Beverly. I kind of wish that little Braves hat would fit on my head. So I'm so excited to sit with both of you. Lee is currently on my board, and Beverly was on our board at the Chamber. So this should be an easy flowing conversation for all of us. But let's just get right to a very deep question, I think, that's very important. Traditionally, women's colleges have been viewed as an environment for mostly white and typically wealthy students. So Beverly, you've had the privilege of teaching and leading at 3 different women's colleges, Mount Holyoke, Spelman, and Smith. Can you compare and contrast the environments and perhaps some of the common denominators among those?
Sure. Well, let me just say, I did not attend a women's college myself. You know, Lee is a graduate of Mount Holyoke. I did the opposite. I went to Wesleyan University in 1971, and at that time, they were just starting to admit women. So one might say I went to a men's college, right? And I say that to say that I I often say I didn't go to a women's college, but I got a women's college education because I spent 13 years as a professor and then an administrator at Mount Holyoke College, where Lee is a graduate of, and then, of course, came to Spelman, where I spent another 13 years. And now I serve and have been serving on the board of Smith College for 6 years. So this is to say I've had a lot of women's college experience in that context. And I think what they all have in common is the centering of women. When you come to a women's college, you experience yourself as being at the center of the education. All of the opportunities are available for you. At Spelman, I used to say when I was president there that, Spelman was built for you, with you in mind. You're going to be at the center of the educational experience. And that's a very empowering thing, because whether you want to be a physics major or an art history major or a engineer or a psychologist, all the people around you think that's appropriate for women to do. And there are a lot of women in your line of sight that will inspire you. That's certainly true at Mount Holyoke, it's true at Smith, and it was certainly true at Spelman.
That's wonderful. So Lee, think about Agnes Scott, and the student population, I think, over the years has really evolved. So tell us about the environment today and the differences compared maybe to the earlier classes that Agnes Scott had.
Absolutely. And I also have to say, I think it's something that's very different here in Atlanta, that it's not necessarily something you see at all women's colleges across the country, although there is a movement toward that. When I arrived in Atlanta 3 years ago, I have to tell you, I was surprised. It was actually at one of the chamber innovation meetings. I was very surprised to learn that 50% of the Atlanta public schools are segregated. 50. So when I came to Agnes Scott, I was delighted to see that it has become an institution where there is no racial, ethnic, or socioeconomic majority. 60% of our students identify as students of color. 40% of our students are Pell Grant recipients. What that means is that their family income is such that they receive federal assistance to go to college. 1/3 of those students are first-generation students. So Agnes Scott and Atlanta are very special because we have Spelman College, which is an HBCU, that's a women's college, and we have Agnes Scott that has been recognized as one of the most diverse liberal arts colleges in the country. Not one of the most diverse women's colleges, but one of the most diverse liberal arts colleges. That's something that people are aspiring to today that Agnes Scott has already accomplished. And I am so grateful to the Atlanta community, because what that means is the Agnes Scott of today reflects the Atlanta community. It reflects the work world. And that's what we're preparing our students for today. So it's a big change from the way it was in the past. And it's something that Atlanta should be proud of. It's a model. In the Northeast, it's not like that. They're trying to achieve that. It's something special for Atlanta that we should all own, being here in Atlanta.
Well, that's outstanding. I need to put Lee and Beverly on our pitch to companies when they're coming here, because I can tell you, when you're talking to economic development prospects, they care deeply about diverse talent. And so sitting here with both of you, this is a highlight that's important when we talk to companies. So thinking about the diversity that both of you highlighted, so today you have a lot of choices in higher education, and women can attend a wide variety of colleges and institutions, but data shows that graduates from women colleges have some clear advantages over students from co-ed institutions. So for both of you, and maybe we'll go to Lee first and then come to you, Beverly, why are women's colleges still valuable or even a game changer for many women? And can you share some of those key advantages?
Did I mention that Agnes Scott is #1 for innovation?
Oh, we were getting to that.
So
that's another question.
Agnes Scott is #1 for innovation by U.S. News and World Report. Again, of liberal arts colleges in the country. I think that really does reflect what is happening today with respect to women's colleges. And the fact, as Beverly had mentioned, women can come into their own. They are prepared. They're prepared for the work world. And I have to say, the statistics bear it out. If you look at the number of women, 30% of the women who are in Fortune 1000 boards are from women's colleges. 30%. What percentage do women's colleges make up of all graduates? 2%. So that is an example of the fact that women's colleges are preparing women for the future. They're preparing women for the work world. They're preparing women leaders. And at Agnes Scott, with our summit experience, that's something we focus on, preparing women to be global leaders, but to be leaders in whatever it is they choose to do as well. So focusing on the individual, I will say some of you have seen, and when I was introduced by Adrian, who's on our board, to Rotary, someone mentioned that I had been a DJ. I never would have done that if it was not for Agnes Scott. And I think that's part of going to a women's college. You have to do everything, and you also learn to do it well.
So Beverly, same question for you. Why is it a game changer? And what are the advantages that come from a women's only college?
What I think, I'm going to elaborate on something I said at the very beginning, which has to do with being at the center of the educational experience. When I was president of Spelman, we had a robotics team. And that robotics team, and there's still a robotics team, but it started during my tenure, and those young women had the opportunity to compete internationally. All of them would have been perhaps engineering majors or pursuing computer science at some other institution had they decided to go somewhere other than Spelman. But when it came time to join the robotics club, I think it is unlikely that they would have been on the robotics team with 5 or 6 other women. They might have been 1 or 2 other women and maybe some young men, but when our team traveled to Japan to compete, they were the only all-female team. And all the other teams were all male, and that was quite striking to me. I use that as an example to simply say, if you're at an institution where whatever the opportunity is that you're interested in is by definition available to you as a woman, the sky's the limit in terms of what you think is possible.
So let's tease that out for a moment. The environment, right? I think that's what we're hearing from you, is that the environment that is fostered on campus for young women is really what leads to that leadership development piece. So I think you've highlighted this, but in terms of student engagement and academic success, describe how that environment supports that.
Sure. Well, I think some of it has to do with the values of the institution, and I know enough about Agnes Scott to say that Spelman and Agnes Scott are similar in this regard, and certainly it was true at Mount Holyoke, though I do think Atlanta is a special community to be a student. A lot of women's colleges are, I'm going to describe as in the middle of nowhere. Small private women's colleges are often in rural places where there's not the same kind of access to opportunities that a city as dynamic as Atlanta offers. Internship opportunities, mentorship opportunities, et cetera. So having the city as part of your environment is certainly important. But I think the idea that you can have hands-on experiences and that part of the expectation of your institution is that you will be civically engaged, that you will be engaged. For example, at Spelman, there's a 2-year requirement. Every student has a requirement to engage in community service for the first 2 years that they are at Spelman, with the expectation that you'll develop that habit, right? So you have to do it for 2 years, but students continue all the way through because they come to understand the value and the obligation that their education creates for them. There's a slogan on the gate of Spelman, enter to learn, exit to serve. And that is part of the expectation. Certainly that kind of service obligation, service expectation was part of the Mount Holyoke ethos as well, though again, in a small town in western Massachusetts, not as many opportunities to exercise it perhaps. But I think that value, that your education is not for you alone, but it is for the uplift of your community, is deeply embedded in, certainly at Spelman.
That's great. So Lee, she mentioned the word obligation. I thought that was interesting as we pair that with education. So when you exit the university or the college, that there's an obligation that you are civically engaged. So Lee, how about the campus of Agnes Scott, and how does that environment foster that success?
Well, excuse me, similarly at Agnes Scott, we focus on the entire student. But Agnes Scott in particular, you've heard before about Summit. So it focuses, it's an experience that's throughout the all 4 years that focuses initially on global learning. Every first-year student, in times that are not COVID, have an experience where they go abroad on a faculty-led trip. For some of our students, it's the first time that they not only have been outside of Georgia, first time they've been on an airplane. So they are having this experience that introduces them to the globe. The second year, our students have a leadership experience right here in Atlanta. It's called SCALE, Sophomore Class Atlanta Leadership Experience, where our sophomores go out and have the opportunity to follow leaders in Atlanta. I want to thank many of the people in the room who are participating. We have 44 partners in Atlanta. So that includes AT&T and Truist, and it also includes the Task Force on Global Health and the CDC. So one, we're combining liberal arts and experiential learning to prepare students for professional success. And it's working. I will say I'm proud that recently we've had several graduates that have been acknowledged by the National Science Foundation for their work. We have a recent graduate who was acknowledged as a MacArthur Genius and given a $650,000 grant to continue her work. One of the things I will say that, and I'm going to be honest with all of you, that troubles me sometimes, when I talk about Agnes Scott and I talk about its diversity, I sometimes get this question, do you still have the same rigor? And my response to that is look at who's graduated. Look, we had 2 Marshall Scholars within the past 3 years, both women of color. Our students are succeeding. It doesn't matter their background, their nationality, doesn't matter where they came from. But it's part of being part of a women's college that we ensure that these women succeed and they're ready for the world.
So I think we've all heard about the preparation that is going on at women's colleges, but one of the statistics that we've seen through COVID is that we've seen women leaving the workplace at very high levels. And so, and that they are also kind of bearing the weight of the obligations in the household. So when women may be thinking about going back to work, what will be one of the most important factors for them as they think about returning to the workforce, or for women graduates, let's say in the class of 2022? We'll go to Lee, and then we'll go to you, Beverly.
Happy to jump in. First of all, I do think that, again, coming out of women's colleges, women are prepared with a skill set that allows them to be flexible and adapt. So as one, there is right now the Great Resignation. People are stepping back and saying, what do I want to do next? Well, again, coming from a women's college, they're the critical thinking skills, the writing skills, the convening skills. And as a result, there are many, many options. So women are changing jobs. They're thinking about other areas to go. The other thing we're seeing at Agnes Scott is that we have a graduate programs at Agnes Scott. Some of them are focused on digital aspects, writing and digital communications, evaluations as well. We've also launched graduate programs with respect to counseling, medical sciences. And so what we're seeing is that women are coming back to school. They're coming to graduate school. Some people are coming back to school to finish their undergraduate, but graduate school as well, and also that flexibility with respect to their critical thinking skills.
That's great. Beverly.
Well, there were two parts to your question. One is, what do women need? And the answer to that is childcare. But
Okay, I hope everyone heard that.
But the second part of your question had to do with the graduates of 2022. And I think what immediately came to my mind was debt, student debt, and the burden that so many students have when they are graduating. Lee mentioned how many of her students were Pell eligible. At HBCUs, that number is easily doubled in terms of the financial need that students have when they come into college. I mentioned that I serve on the board of Smith. Smith just made a big announcement last week, public information, that they were, as part of the outcome of the stock market, Smith is now in a position to be able to offer financial aid without loans. There's only 20 colleges and universities in the country that promise no loans, and Smith has just joined the first women's college to do that. But I mention that to say it's an important move for Smith, but all of us would, Spelman would be happy to do that if they had the resources, and that's the difference between a couple $2 billion in your endowment and,
Hear,
exactly, hear, yes. But I say that to say that if you're graduating with a lot of debt, it influences what you're able to do. It influences the kind of job you're likely to take. It influences whether you're ready to go on to graduate school, if you're thinking about how am I going to pay this debt back. And particularly for this generation of students, I think there's a lot of anxiety about that. And so, what should we do about that? Provide financial aid.
And childcare.
Yes, always. That is. I know that Mary Campbell couldn't be here today, but if she were in the room, she would say that's her number one priority. Certainly it was mine during that time. How do we provide support for students who have the talent but don't have the dollars to be able to graduate unencumbered by burdensome debt?
I hope everyone heard that message loud and clear. And I think it is important when we're thinking about graduates as they're entering the workforce, but also women that are returning as well. And it's interesting to hear that they're also pursuing higher education as part of that re-entry into the workforce. So I want to pivot for a moment. Beverly, you mentioned the robotics team at Spelman, and Lee, you've also touched on STEM and how important it is. So we know that opportunities, and I am an engineer, retired engineer by training, but we know that opportunities for women in STEM fields is increasing and has been a topic for business and education leaders for a number of years. But we also know that's not the only thing you need to be able to have a mastery of. And Lee, I think you mentioned this. We need skills like oral and written communication, leadership, collaboration, analytical thinking in order to be successful. And that's what employers are demanding when you look at job postings. Those are the skills that they're looking for. So for both of you, and Beverly, I'll go to you first. Based on the skills that employers are rating as important, how can a liberal arts education help to better prepare students for the workforce? And Lee, we'll come to you next after that.
Well, there's a lot of evidence that, in fact, that's exactly what liberal arts colleges do, because you need flexibility of mind, critical thinking skills. You need to be able to communicate effectively. You need to be able to engage with other people effectively. All of those things are the kinds of skills you get from a liberal arts college, where you're able to engage across lines of difference with your peers, with your faculty members, hands-on research, internship opportunities. All of that allows you to synthesize those skills that you are honing, whether you're an English major. I mean, there are a lot of majors that people don't talk much about anymore, right? History, philosophy, classics. And I mentioned I was a psychology major. I'm a psychologist, but I mentioned those to say that people will often say, "What are you going to do with that major?" You're going to do a lot. You're going to be able to communicate effectively. You're going to be able to share your ideas orally and in written form. You're going to be able to solve problems. You're going to be able to think critically. And most employers, in my experience, say, We're not looking for people who already know how to do this job. We're looking for people who know how to learn, because we will give them the hands-on specific skills that you need for this particular industry. We want to know that you are capable of adapting and working well with a team and demonstrating your ability to learn. And that's what liberal arts majors of any kind are able to do with great skill.
I love it. The willingness and the knowledge on how to learn. Very important. Lee.
Well, I do want to go back to one thing that that Beverly mentioned, because Mary would have mentioned, and I have to as well, which is really the need to support our students. The scholarship. I mean, what people do not realize is the level of scholarship that Agnes Scott provides to its students. We have been incredibly fortunate in the past, but what we see for the future is that we do need support to continue to support these students. The other thing I will say is that we also realize how important it is to have a residential education. There are debates, and clearly we all have to look to the future of going online, but if there's one thing that COVID showed us, is that not everybody learns well online. Some people do. And that how difficult it was for some of our students to be in an environment where they didn't have the access to technology, where they weren't sure where food was coming from. That when they come to campus at Agnes Scott, they know they're going to have food. They know that there's a place for them to stay. They also know that no one around them knows who they are, and they have the same opportunity to excel. So that is also one of the differentiators for colleges that are supporting a diverse population. With respect to STEM, I have to say that I think STEM without liberal arts is not really the STEM of the future. You need to combine them. A perfect example is AI. Agnes Scott has a minor in artificial intelligence. All that technology that's happening, someone is teaching that technology. You want them to have the right answers, the right ethics. Are they teaching it to function the right way? And we were very excited. We had a program over the summer with Google where Google came to the conclusion that it was going to be difficult to teach those with the technological skills, those thinking aspects, the critical thinking. They flipped it on its head and came to Agnes Scott and said, you have all that. Let's see now about teaching the technical. We think this is actually the better way to go. That teaching those critical skills, you need that for 4 years. We can teach the technical in a summer as a result. So it's STEM, of course, is extremely important in women in STEM, but I think it's even better when those students who are biology majors and neuroscience majors are also taking music, they're also taking history at the same time. It better informs their decisions for the future.
I think that's so informative, too, when we think about innovation in the workspace, because not only does it require the person who can think about how to program, right, to get to the end result, it's that design thinking, it's the creativity, it's the analytical skills that move you along that innovation spectrum. And that's what most companies are looking for today, is the person that can innovate within the company. And so one of the interesting things that we've seen over the past several years is innovation on the campuses of Agnes Scott and Spelman and others. And so we've moved from campus innovation labs to entrepreneurship classes to research partnerships, higher education institutions and corporations forging new types of relationships. And so I want to drive down into two that are interesting here in our community. And so, Lee, I'm going to start with you about scale. And so you talked about that, sophomore class Atlanta leadership experience, as part of every 4-year journey. Can you tell us more about the program, maybe how folks can get involved here? But why is it so important to incorporate that curriculum into the students' success path?
Well, I really do think that at Agnes Scott, we are educating the leaders of the future. So it is important whether it's in a corporate leadership, not-for-profit leadership, whether they're entrepreneurs, they're leaders. So part of it is to be sure that we are helping to educate students to be leaders. But the best way to learn, in addition to what you have in the classroom, is that experience and having that experience. So that's why we've brought it to the Atlanta community, why we have 44 partners in Atlanta. Anyone who wants to be part of SCALE, where we bring a group of students in March into your organization, feel free to contact me. I'm in the directory for Rotary, and I'll put you in contact with the right people as well. But I will tell you, in addition to Mount Holyoke, you heard that I went to Northeastern University Law School. Northeastern is experiential learning. You go to school for a quarter, work for a quarter, school for a quarter, work for a quarter. I believe that's the best combination, to combine liberal arts and their practical experience. You'll have people ready for the future.
Thank you, Lee. And now at the Atlanta University Consortium, we've had some interesting investments. For example, the Propel Center, which has been a partnership between Apple and Southern Company. So what kind of impact does that have on liberal arts education?
Well, first of all, let me just say that whenever you have that kind of investment, we had this panel a couple of weeks ago on HBCUs, and when you see that kind of investment in the AUC or other HBCU communities, that tells you that people are waking up to the potential of the talent there, right, which is very important. I remember Mary stood up at the HBCU panel and made reference to a statistic that I often used to cite myself, which is that more black women earn PhDs coming in the sciences, in the STEM fields, coming from Spelman than from anywhere else, according to the National Science Foundation. And that it was true, you know, when I was president, and it continues to be true today. And what that says is that there's a lot of talent, not just, you know, when you hear the name Spelman, you don't think engineering necessarily, but of course Spelman has dual degree engineering program with Georgia Tech and other engineering schools. I remember when I was president, and the president of Georgia Tech used to like to say how many black engineering graduates, black female engineering graduates were coming out of Georgia Tech, and I always like to remind him that, you know, many of them started their educations at Spelman, and then, of course, did the second half of that dual degree engineering program. But this is to say that you know, when you hear liberal arts, you don't necessarily think STEM, right? But liberal arts doesn't mean no science. Right. It means a broad array of offerings. And what they all have in common is this focus on critical thinking, et cetera. So what we know is that the organizations like Apple, Southern Company, and others who are looking for diverse talent are looking for thinkers. And where do you find thinkers? You find them at liberal arts colleges.
Great. And now I'm saying that that we may have the hook. But I'm gonna
few questions.
Time for a few questions. So any questions? Got a
Zack?
couple? Alex?
I want to give you the opportunity to talk about the real financial, where it hits the road for small liberal arts colleges, private liberal arts colleges, and that's the discount rate. And the reality is when you look at what your sources of income are, and it should mostly be from tuition, what percentage of the children at both Agnes Scott and Spelman are paying the full published tuition cost? And how much then are you able to provide for those who don't pay the full tuition? And the difference between those two and the struggle that creates for liberal arts colleges.
Each of us is looking at the other thing. You go first. I will start to say that, you know, in this day and age, I'm not sure liberal arts colleges can survive just on tuition. If you look at the costs of maintaining facilities, you look at faculty costs, et cetera. So one of the things we at Agnes Scott have looked at is how do we diversify our portfolio. The other thing is that traditionally, if you look at places like Mount Holyoke, where I started, Agnes Scott, they were founded by benefactors. That a good part of it did rely on Coca-Cola, did rely on the community to support these areas. So I think that's one of the things we have to realize with respect to liberal arts colleges, that it isn't just on tuition alone, especially if you want to educate a diverse population. So, we at Agnes Scott clearly have made that investment in our students, but to be able to continue that investment, we're going to need support from our benefactors. We also have diversified with respect to different areas of income to be able to support the students. But that is the great challenge, and it's not just liberal arts colleges. I mean, it's education as a whole. How do we support it? How do we value it? How do we when we value something, we put our money behind it. How do we put our money behind education? How do we put our money behind the members of our community who are going to be the people who are our future employees that don't have the means today, but education is one of the best sources of social mobility. It's how people get to the next stage. And so we have to invest in it.
I certainly agree with everything that Lee just said, but I was thinking about the same question from a different perspective. And that has to do with, you asked the question about the discount rate. One of the things that I understood when I came to Spelman, and still understand, is that the tuition has been discounted for everyone. By that I mean, I mentioned that I serve on the board of Smith. Smith is going to cost $75,000 a year next year. Spelman is 2/3 of that for everyone. So I would certainly say that the quality of education that you get at Spelman is every bit as good as what you're going to get at Smith, but we're not going to ever charge $75,000 for it because so few of our students would be able to afford that. So I want to say that, and that's true at Morehouse and it's true at Clark Atlanta. You find an HBCU and you will find that the tuition is significantly lower than other small liberal arts colleges, because the median income in the African American community is $40,000 a year, approximately. If you charge $75,000, nobody's going to be able to pay that, hardly. So the fact of the matter is you have to price yourself differently, and you have to be very efficient with the dollars you have in order to meet the need. However, having said that, so the conversation about discount rate is different at an HBCU than it is at a majority or historically majority institution because of the nature of the population it has been serving. That said, Lee hits the nail on the head when we say we have to invest in education, we have to invest in our future, and young people, no matter what institution they're attending, certainly the students who are coming to Spelman or Morehouse or any of the AUC schools, are very dependent upon scholarship support to be able to make that education happen. The worst possible outcome for any student is debt and no degree. If you start and can't finish, that's what you have. You've taken on debt, you don't have a degree, you don't get the payoff or the payback that you're gonna get if you're able to graduate. So when you have students who are halfway through or maybe even at the end of their junior year and now in need of scholarship support, they've made a lot of investment in their education, their families have. Unless they get to the finish line, it's all for naught. So that is why investing in students throughout the four-year journey is so important. But you're right, for the institutions, you need tuition support, you need endowment, you need fundraising, you need multiple streams to keep your lights on.
What percentage are paying for tuition?
At Spelman, I would say they're all paying the full tuition in the sense, but some of them are borrowing a lot of money to do it, right? When I was president, and keep in mind that Dr. Campbell's been in the role 6 years, so some of my data is dated, but when I was president at Spelman, I would say roughly 10% of our students were from families who could easily afford to pay the tuition, and I had the point of view that if you can afford it, you should pay it, as opposed to offering merit scholarships to people who don't have need. That said, the discount rate when I was at Spelman was about 33%, and it was intentionally kept at that level. I know that there are other institutions for whom it has been much higher, but that was not the case at Spelman. But we were already less expensive, which is my point.
Thank you. Unfortunately, I think we're at the end of our time together. Lee, Beverly, Katie, thank you so much. What a great discussion. Also, just a reminder about next week, please join us. We have a very special program around Armed Services Day with Matt Smith, who's the Brigadier General for U.S. Preparedness, and go Braves. Have a great week.